recording a very simple macro and then being able to use that in the future in any of your workbooks. All a macro does is it just records any of your actions that you make in Excel, and then you can just repeat those in the future by replaying that macro as many times as you want. So I have a workbook here, and the action that I would like Excel to remember is I want to turn cell A1 red. So something like choosing my fill color and choosing red, something like this. It's going to be a very simple macro. I'm going to undo that action that I just did so that I can record it using my macro. Now, the way you can start recording your macros, you have a little button way down here down at the bottom next to the word ready. And clicking on this button will start recording all of the actions that you make in Excel. You can also find the record macro button on the view ribbon. Way over here on the right, you should see a macros button, and you can hit the record macro right here. So as soon as I hit record, Excel wants to know what's the name of your macro. Now, I would recommend choosing something pretty obvious. I'm going to choose the name red. That'll help me remember what this macro does. You can see Excel also gives the option of assigning a shortcut key. So I don't have to use my mouse. I could just use my shortcut to run this macro. Now, if you want to choose a shortcut key, I would recommend try not to use a key that you already use for a shortcut. For example, I like to use my copy and paste from my keyboard, so I use Control-C or Control-V to copy and to paste respectively. So I should not use C or V in here. However, I don't use the letter R for any keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to say Control-R is going to be my shortcut for this red macro. We're going to store this macro in this workbook. That means that whenever I use this workbook, the red macro will be available to me. You have some other options in here. New workbook, you can start fresh and have a new workbook and have this macro stored there. Personal macro workbook means this macro will be stored in Excel, kind of in the background, so that any workbook you happen to be in, it'll be available. We can see some ways to get around that though a bit later. So I'm going to choose this workbook. In the description box, you can type any sort of useful description you may want in case anyone else needs to use this macro. I think this macro is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to worry about a description. I'll just click OK. Now I am recording. So any actions that I take now, anything I click on, anything I type, Excel is going to record, it's going to remember, so I can use that in the future. First thing I want to tell Excel for this macro is select cell A1. I know A1 is selected already, but I didn't choose any action to select it since I started my macro. So I need to make sure that I click once on cell 1. Perfect. Now I want to turn that cell red, so I go to the Home ribbon, and in the font group, I'll choose my fill and choose whatever color I want. I'll just choose red. And that's it. That's all the actions I want to do for this pretty straightforward macro. So down at the bottom you can see my record macro button has now turned into a stop button. As soon as I click stop, I've now finished recording my macro. So let's see if it worked. I'm going to go to sheet 2, and you can see A1 is nice and blank white cell. Now if I go to my view ribbon, there's my macros button. I hit the bottom half, and I want to view macros. There it is. In this workbook, which is called Macro Practice, there's one macro, it's called red. And here I can run this macro, I can step into or edit this macro, which we're not going to get into in this help file. You can delete this macro, or you can just hit cancel if you don't want to run it at all. I want to run it. This means I'm going to play those actions, and it's going to happen really quickly. So there you go. You can see I didn't click my mouse, I didn't go to the Home ribbon, I didn't select red fill. Excel did it all for me automatically. Now if I go to sheet 3, again I can see cell A1 is nice and blank and white. I'm going to see if my keyboard shortcut works. Now my keyboard shortcut for this macro was Control-R. So on my keyboard I press Control-R, and there you go. Very quickly I've turned cell A1 red. So here you see that we can create macros that will record and then replay any actions that you want to do in Excel. Now as long as we have this workbook open, Macro Practice, I could open up another workbook. So now I've opened up book 2, I'm on sheet 1, and I want to run that red macro. As long as that other workbook is open, I can go to my view ribbon, macros, View Macros. Now, you can see it's already pointing to the other workbook that I have open. And I can see in this workbook, there's no macros. It's blank. If I go to Macro Practice, I can see there it is, Macro Practice red, and I can run. And it automatically turns cell A1 red for me. So I hope you found this help file on macros useful, and I would encourage you to experiment and play and try recording your own macros and see if you can find some interesting uses for macros when you use Excel. Thanks and have a great day.